Greetings, Facebook world. It's funny seeing you all here because I'm never here on a Friday night. I'm normally on Instagram Live conducting the MattyRocks experience. But tonight is a very special MattyRocks experience coming to you from Facebook Live. The MattyRocks experience, the Friday night Facebook Live interview sessions. The first installment. I'm going to wait to see some more people join here. And then I will hopefully tie in my guest. When I see my guest, I will get some more people on here. All right, there he is. So tonight, very special interview, very special Friday night Facebook Live session on the Facebook platform. And tonight I'm going to welcome in my guest, Osseo Senior High Class of '89 graduate, songwriter, steel pedal guitarist, CJ Chad Udeen. Whoa. It worked. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear? I can hear something over there. Can you hear me, Chad? Wait till I can get Chad here. Diggy Cat, I know you're watching. Can you hear me, Diggy Cat? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I'm going to put this back a little bit. CJ, I can see ya. Diggy Cat, can you hear me? All right, Diggy Cat can hear me. CJ, looks like we're having problems on your end. I guess I lost CJ. We will wait for him to come back. Okay, there he is. There he is. I'm going to add him one more time. See if we can bring him in successfully.
Is that better?
Oh, there you are.
Wow. How are you?
I'm good. It's been what, 32 years?
Yeah. Who's counting, right?
Yeah. Who's counting? Well,
That's right.
I already did my intro, so everyone knows who we're interviewing. We'll
Hey, buddy. Is it on my end? Do I need to restart something
I
there?
don't know. That just blew my eardrums out. It was an SOS call. What is an SOS call?
I don't know. That's usually a SOS call is usually some kind of like the telephone powering down or something. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Well, here we are.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Hopefully
joining me.
My pleasure, brother.
Absolutely. So, so I know it's early into the new year. Have you transitioned into 2021? Good.
Well, I think everybody was waiting for 2021, right? And so it really hasn't been that much different than 2020 for me. We were really getting ready to go out on tour in March of 2020 when we had rehearsed, we were ready, and we were literally loading the bus when they called us back. So we haven't toured since March of 2020. So nothing. So as far as the transition into 2021, really nothing's happened as far as professionally, but I'm, of course, like everybody, I'm happy for a new year and some new hope.
Absolutely. We know that the music industry has taken a big hit, and we hope that takes a turn here very shortly, and we get back to business.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm doing okay, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of my brothers, and I've got a ton of them down here, and it's mostly, well, it's everybody really. I even tell even my rich friends don't have money right now. So
Right.
it's a tough little bit, but yeah, I don't know if anybody's been hit harder than the Nashville or the entertainment industry. And I even had people say to me, well, we're in the same boat. You know, they're running a bar, they're running a salon, but they're open. I said, we're not in the same boat. I'm in a lifeboat. You might be in a bass boat, but you know, we're not in the same boat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Man, if you would have told me 32 years ago that we'd be doing this tonight, I wouldn't have believed you.
Crazy. No, I wouldn't either. No, I just, you can never predict the future. And that's why you never know what, when I was a 6 and 7 year old boy, my dad was giving me steel guitar lessons and I had that skill. But, you know, I jumped into sports so heavy, I would have never predicted even for myself, 6 months to a year out of high school that I would have been pursuing this career playing music.
Right. So what have you done during the quarantine and the pandemic to keep yourself in the music groove?
Well, to be honest with you, I coached my kids' basketball team this year. It's been more of rather than try to fight a fight that was going to be an uphill, which was trying to play. Of course, I've been practicing and doing those things. Myself and a guy named Blind Joe, who was on The Voice, we did a concert in my driveway for my neighbors, did one of those. That's the only gig I've done since in almost a year now. But I got a 10-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter, so I've just kind of dove into family time, coach my kids every chance I get, and get out there and just do the best I can, with this situation, making sure I have a positive attitude.
Absolutely, and family first, always.
Always, yeah. I'm all about my family, like anybody should be. Of course, that's a no-brainer.
Right, CJ. If there was one thing that you learned about yourself during this time of quarantine and pandemic that maybe you really never realized about yourself, what do you think that is?
Great question. I think it's probably that anything can be taken away from you, right? My son is 10 years old and he's a big time baseball player down here, and he broke his shoulder, and it's what I tell him is what I'm going through right now. It can all be taken away, whether it's an injury, whether, this is how I make my money. But I mean, anything can happen, anything can be taken away. And I think what I've learned that you have to appreciate what you have and what you're doing and live for the moment. I've always kind of said, you got to live for the moment. I kind of understand it now. Like this conversation that we're having right now, this is meaningful to me. And the next thing I do, when it's go downstairs and spend the time, that moment, whatever it is, if it's playing with my kids or petting the dog, that has to be meaningful. Literally every little action that you do should be meaningful for you. And that's kind of, this quarantine has kind of helped reinforce that for me.
Right on.
Yeah, brother.
CJ, if you would, take MattyRocks listeners and viewers back to the early years of your life in Maple Grove, Minnesota. And, give us some insight to how music and the whole steel guitar playing came into your life.
Okay. Well, my dad is Al Udeen. He's still alive. He just had his 91st birthday last month. And there he is right there. I appreciate that. That's my number one. He is, he worked for Showbud Steel Guitar Company, which was the premier steel guitar brand, which was owned by Gretsch. And that was basically what I grew up with. The UPS truck would come to our house almost every day and drop off one of those things that weigh about 95 pounds at the end of our driveway or up to the door. And we just cringed as young boys that we had to carry that thing in if our parents weren't home. So, but my dad, going back, he was a steel guitar player in the 50s, 60s, 70s. He was Buck Owens' first steel guitar player.
Wow.
And then he lived in Nashville and was on the road with many of the greats. And then met my mom and settled down in the late 60s, 1970. I was born in 71. So my dad was a steel guitar hoss. He was a absolute alpha personality and an alpha behind that steel guitar. And so that was what I grew up with. And that and our love for music was kind of my whole life, or my love for music and sports was pretty much, and to this day really is. I tell people I'm 50% jock, 50% musician. The jock part never left me.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I could tell you a million stories about nothing better than being a pretty for a musician to be a pretty decent athlete when you're on that athletic scale versus musicians and go out and get to compete against musicians. I've got great stories. I'm pretty, I don't want to say I'm undefeated, but
Right.
I do pretty well against a lot of the country music stars and musicians or whatnot. And you run across some really great athletes that are musicians. But to answer your question, I've kind of had this steel guitar thing hanging in, I don't want to say in a secret kind of compartment, but in one of the stories that I thought about when I knew we were going to do this, I think it was in 4th or 5th grade at Edgewood, I brought I brought a steel guitar in, and
Wow.
it was for show and tell, but it was also like, it was a show and tell of instruction. And so I spent my 15 minutes time setting up this steel guitar. And then, I set this whole thing up, and the whole thing was how you set up a pedal steel guitar, because if you can see, it's like a table. We have legs, and then we have pedals, and it's a whole intricate thing. So I spent the whole time setting it up, and then my time was up, and everybody's looking at me like, I remember, I think it was Jason Mullen go, play it, like, and I'm like, oh, your time's up. And I'm like, oh my God, I just spent 15 minutes showing people how to set it up when I should have spent that 15 minutes showing people, here's a steel guitar, here's how you make this sound. I never got to that part.
Wow.
But so it was introduced kind of back then. And then, of course, sports really took a forefront for me all the way up until I was about 19.
Right on. Who were the musical influences early on in your life that helped shape to make you the steel guitar player that you are today? I know your dad was into it, but was there anyone else that you
There is. There's other ones. Yeah, there's a guy named, when you talk about steel guitar players, that instrument right there, that's a show bud. It's a two words, show bud. You can see it over on the corner of the end in the front of the right there. That's the show bud. That stands for two guys. That show stands for Shot, which is Shot Jackson, and the bud stands for Buddy Emmons. Buddy Emmons was like the Elvis Presley of the steel guitar.
Oh.
He basically invented the tuning and all the evolution of the instrument. He basically was responsible for. And my dad had always told me, a lot of people always say, what's so great about Buddy Emmons? Buddy Emmons, he passed away a few years ago. And my dad always would tell me he was 25, 30 years ahead of anybody. So he was always kind of our Elvis. And then specifically to answer your question, there was a guy, he's in Nashville. He was from St. Paul, and his name is Wayne Dahl. And Wayne Dahl went on to play with Martina McBride for about 20 years. And he was just this freak talent that was he's 10 years older than me. And so when I was 17, 18, I was sneaking out to the bars a lot of times by myself to go watch him play. And he kind of took me under his wing. And when I first moved to Nashville, I moved in with him, and I just literally had a bedroom. He had just was living with his wife, and I was in the bedroom, and I was just soaking everything I could off him. He was doing odd jobs when he wasn't playing, and I'd be like, show me this, show me that. And I'd drive him crazy, And I was just, he had a freak talent, and he was one of the top talented steel guitar players in the world at his young age too. And so to have him come from our town was pretty cool. And actually a funny thing about that steel guitar is a lot of the steel guitar players, Wayne Dahl is one of them, came from Minneapolis that went to Nashville, and most of them, pretty much all of them, I can't think of one in the list. I'm not going to sit here and drop a bunch of names, but there's about 8 or 10 of them, and all of them would say that my dad either taught them or influenced them in some way. And so the steel guitar kind of brought its way from Minneapolis to Nashville, and that goes back to the club scene that happened in Minneapolis back long before even we were born.
Right.
You go back to the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and I've got some of that stuff, and it's even on my Facebook page. It's a printout of some of the newsletters that came out, and the bar scene in Minneapolis in like the 60s and even the 70s, the music was 7 nights a week, and there was live music in tens of hundreds of bars. It'll blow your mind, and the scene. And there was one place specifically called the Flame Cafe in Minneapolis on Nicollet Avenue, and I encourage everybody that's into the history of Minneapolis and music and the history of all that to research the Flame Cafe. You could just Google the Flame Cafe in Minneapolis, and that there wasn't a musician in Nashville that didn't play the Flame Cafe if you were in the scene in the 50s or the 60s. And if I ever talked to somebody that was in that age bracket, I would always say I'm from Minneapolis, and they're always like clockwork. They would say, "Do you remember the Flame Cafe?" Which was before our time.
Right.
But me being kind of student of the game and through the stories of my dad, I knew the Flame Cafe, and I knew the band, and I knew the guys, and knew some of them personally, and it was a fabulous story about what the Flame Cafe was for Minneapolis and for country music.
Wow, great story. Thanks for sharing
Yeah,
that.
man, the Flame is awesome.
So you might have just answered this question that I'm about to go into, but when was that moment when you said, I really want to play steel guitar and be a touring musician? Like, when was that moment?
Yeah, you're asking great questions. Some of these questions nobody's ever asked me, and I remember the moment exactly. It was when I got done high school football. I went on some recruiting visits. Myself, Chris Nelson, Matt Ellison, a couple of us Osseo football players, we all went to South Dakota State on a recruiting visit. And it got weird as far as recruitments and monies and whether we were going to get scholarships and all that. And so I ended up going to Normandale and playing football, where they moved me. I was kind of a wide receiver in high school, and they moved me to quarterback. So I played quarterback, and we ended up winning the state championship at Normandale. And if you win the state championship, you go to play Illinois, their state championship, and you go play the Midwest Bowl. And we did, and we got there, and it was like Prop 48 time. And they came out, and it was like their entire team was all these Division I recruits that didn't have the ACT. Was it ACT back in the day? They didn't have the ACT and the GPA to get into Notre Dame, Colorado, and all the big schools. And we were down 56-0. At halftime, I was the second string quarterback on that team, and at halftime, they said, "Udeen, you're in." And I went in there and just ran for my life. After that game, that's when I thought, man, I don't know. And then within a few weeks after that season, and I started my next, I guess it would be semester of college, I knew it's like in 2 weeks I was done. And I remember going home and telling my dad, I think I want to be a steel guitar player. I had to let my football career go at that point. And he looked at me and he goes, "Okay, then it's if you want it," because he knew that I had learned all this stuff when I was young, and I would go and play. He was playing when my dad retired from Nashville and just kind of became a family man and settled down in Maple Grove, Minnesota. He played the bar scene up until a few years ago. He was an 87, 88-year-old man driving to Buffalo, Minnesota, and playing there at the clubs from weekends 9 to 1, playing the Coon Rapids. He was playing the Coon Rapids VFW at 87 years old. He played through his entire career. So when he was playing, when I was growing up, I would go and either sit in with the band, even all my years through high school. I'd be playing a football game on Friday, and that Saturday night I'd be at the lookout, and they'd let me get up and play 2 or 3 songs. So I had learned, and he had sent me to one of his buddies in Wisconsin, and I took a kind of a couple-week boot camp with him. And so I knew I knew the concept of playing. I knew where to play, you know, like where the positions were. I knew how to play. That is an instrument you just have to play. So when I told him I was going to play, I want to be a steel guitar player, he was like, okay. And he was, you know, then you're going to have to put the time in. And really it was just like, I don't think I ever went back to, I think I quit Normandale midway through that second semester, and I was done, and I was all in. And probably within 2 or 3 months, I heard about some guys from Osseo that had a country music band. And through sitting in and playing with my dad, it was these kids. It's a guy named Tim Paulson who graduated from Osseo, and you know his brother Tom Paulson.
Yeah.
And then these were guys I didn't run with, and they were older than me. But I was so in that jock scene, I didn't know these guys very well. And there were 2 brothers, the Schultz brothers, Travis Schultz, who I had a math course with.
I remember them.
His brother Tom Schultz, and that was the band. Tom and Travis Schultz,
wow.
and Tim Paulson and myself. And he lived off on the corner of Hemlock Lane and Bass Lake Road. And they were practicing in the basement, and I brought my steel guitar in there I think I was still 18, and they all joke about it to this day. I had all the licks, but I just was green. I didn't know where to put them, and I didn't know how to do that. And we just jumped in and started playing gigs, and then I knew this has probably got wings right here.
Right on.
Yeah.
For those people not familiar with the steel guitar and how it breaks down and how it plays, give us a little insight to that.
The conception of the steel guitar was basically invented in Hawaii, which was the Hawaiian steel guitar that you hear when you see, you know, when somebody's doing a Hawaii bit or Hawaiian bit or something like that. You'll hear that steel guitar, that real floaty kind of steel guitar sound. That's where the instrument was invented, and it worked its way to America, or I should say America, to the States, where it was the original just regular steel guitar, which is just basically what you're seeing in the background, just like a table with strings on it. And then in Nashville in the mid 50s, they started putting pedals, and you can see there's pedal rods that go down from that thing, from that guitar or from that table looking thing. And what those pedals do allows you to bend the strings. And nowadays, regular guitar players, you've heard of the B benders, they'll have benders where they can bend strings like a whole tone, which is taking that note and bringing it up one note. And that's what the steel guitar basically does, is you can bend those strings up or down. And that was kind of the invention. And there was a song that a singer named Ray Price had in the mid 50s called Slowly. And that was the first ever song that had the pedal steel guitar on it. And every steel guitar player in Nashville in the 50s then was scrambling to get pedals on their lap steels, which was literally drilling holes into the body of that guitar and putting like a plunger sort of thing to pull that string so they could bend that string. And so that was kind of the invention. So it happened in the 50s, and it happened in Nashville, it happened in America. So they say the pedal steel guitar was invented 75 years ago in America.
Wow.
So I play pedal steel guitar.
Right on.
And we can bend the strings, and we have a volume pedal, and we have knee levers that do the same things. We can do that with the knees too.
Right on. Great story.
Yeah,
I want to go back.
Instrument.
I want to go back to your dad for a second. I want to know if there's one thing that your father, Al, with his love and passion for the steel guitar and for music, that he taught you about life in the music industry. What was that lesson that he taught you that you carry with you to this day?
Yeah, a great question again, brother. He discouraged me from playing music when I was young from day one. I can give you, it's ingrained in my mind about him talking about the lifestyle of the musicians, what you're getting into, the probability that you weren't going to make a lot of money, the probability that you were going to be gone a lot, that you were going to have a tough time with family. He was a strong discouragement towards getting in the music business and becoming he's seen so many guys burn out. He would say, oh, that guy's burnt out, that guy's flamed out. And he was so discouraging about getting into the music industry and becoming what the stereotypical musician was, which he witnessed on every corner. In fact, there was a guitar player, was his best friend, was one of the greatest guitar players to ever come out of Minneapolis, a guy named Jimmy Colvard. And Jimmy Colvard went to Nashville and became the #1 session player in Nashville. And he ended up committing suicide, got into the lifestyle. And so that was so strong. And that was my dad's best friend. That was his closest love in the music business. And for that to happen to him really was like, he pushed me as hard as he wanted me to, if I wanted to play, he wanted me to do it as a hobby or something of that nature. So that is ingrained on me of if I'm going to do this, don't fall into the trap of all the things that we've seen, and I see it. We all see it, right? It's in every walk of life. Mm-hmm. But in the music business is we're sensitive people, and sometimes when things don't go our way, we have a tendency to depression. And like right now, man, the depression right now, I know guys that just didn't make it through this quarantine. I had my best friend passed away, and it wasn't related exactly to what we're talking about, but it's not for it's not for the faint of hearts. I don't know if that quite answered the question.
No, absolutely.
But my dad definitely was very discouraging of like getting into this lifestyle, and so I knew if I had to do this. Of course, in Nashville in the 80s and 90s, guys started wearing fanny pack. They started going to the gym every day, and there was a whole, even with Gary Allen, we would go to the gym every day. We would drink pretty heavy at night and play. But we were always, when we were on the Rascal Flatts tour, they would always joke, "You guys are the most healthiest guys that we've ever met." We drink and stay up all night, and then we get up every morning. It was a requirement that we went to the gym.
Wow.
Yeah.
Get all that alcohol out.
Yeah, you had to get it out, sweat it out, and do it all over again.
All right. Well, we move on to Molly and the Haymakers as your first, really your first big shot at the music scene out of Wisconsin. Talk us through how that opportunity came to be with Molly and the Haymakers.
It was, there was a guy in Minneapolis named Tom Brenner. Tom Brenner was in Savage, and he had a music store. And the guy, Andy D, that band was basically two people. It was Molly, and her right-hand man was Andy D. Andy D was the blonde-headed guy, I think, on the end there. And Andy they decided when they, he's somewhere not in that pic. I think you'd have to stretch that to find Andy. There he is. That's Andy over there on the end. So when they scored a record deal, which was super rare for a Minneapolis or a Wisconsin or a Midwest country band to get a record deal in Nashville, is unheard of. I don't know if it's ever happened. I know Dave Dudley got one back in the 60s, but I don't know through the 70s, the 80s, and then into the 90s that there was a band from up north that could go to Nashville and get a record deal. But they scored a record deal on Warner Brothers, and so they wanted, and they were kind of an alt-rock, pre-alt-rock kind of band. They were not, one of those guys was really a country player, so they wanted to add pedal steel. And so that Andy D contacted Tom Brenner, and he reached out to my dad, and he said he's probably too old, but you know what? He's got a son that's just getting up. And so he kind of put me up to kind of set that whole thing up. And I drove up to Hayward, Wisconsin, was their home base. They had a recording studio there, and they lived kind of out of that recording studio. And I got an audition, and I worked so hard. And I picked my buddy Wayne Dahl's brains about all these steel guitar parts, and that were on their record that was recorded in Nashville. They went to Nashville and recorded a record. And there's a guy named Paul Franklin in Nashville who kind of was the session guy. He played on all their stuff. And so I was able, and I had been studying Paul Franklin since I started playing. And so I learned all his stuff. And so I went there, and just by really focusing on Paul Franklin's parts, I was able to go up there and kind of get that job. And so when I got that job, which was in March of 1991, I was still, I don't know if that would put me at 18 or 19 years old. They were going to Nashville to play Fanfare, the Grand Ole Opry, and do the circuit. And like, as quick as I got the job, like, yeah, you got it. We're going to Nashville. We're playing the Grand Ole Opry. And I could just remember going, oh my God, I'm not ready for that.
Wow.
I'm just like, just like 3 months ago, I was in the basement with my Osseo brothers, just barely hanging with those guys, and we're like just a garage, we're a garage band right now. And I'm like, I'm going to the show. It's like, you're going to the show, Bo. You're going to the show, and I wasn't ready, but I was like, you better get ready. And 4 months ago, I was getting smashed playing football, and here I am 4 months later. I'm going to play the Grand Ole Opry live on TV, and we're going to play the Warner Brothers show on Fanfare, which is at the fairgrounds, which means you're playing with all the Warner Brothers acts. Which at that time was Dwight Yoakam and all the different acts on Warner Brothers, and then you go and play the Opry with Vince Gill and all the big names, and get ready because it's there. And it happened quick. And I remember literally walking into the Opry with my heart. I could feel my heart just walking in there outside of my body.
Boom, boom.
Yeah, that's how it was. And then because they were in a band and I was part of this band, it was unlike anything you would ever experience. You were part of the band. So when it was time to do like the interview portion, they came around, handed everybody 6 microphones, and I'm holding a microphone. And they're saying, okay, so I understand that you're now the newest member of the band. Tell me about yourself. On TV going like, well, I'm not ready for this. I'm CJ Udeen. I'm from Minneapolis. I don't know what to tell you. That's how green I was.
Wow.
Yeah, I was super green, and they knew they knew how green I was. And I think they had some hesitation too about, oh my God, what do we do here? He's got this kid, but I just kind of worked through it.
Good for you.
Yeah.
95, your first big steady Nashville gig act with Hank Williams III.
Yeah, so the Haymaker thing at about 95, they lost their record deal, 94, 95, and I knew early on I was going to Nashville. I knew that the group that you're looking at behind you there, they were all going to probably settle on and do their own thing and more downshift for a better. They were going to downshift, not chase any. None of them were going to Nashville.
Right.
I knew I was going to Nashville, and I knew that I kind of picked my spot, and I just wanted to, whenever I was going to go, because I knew when I was going to go, I was going to have to change my entire life because, you're leaving home. I was still really connected to the Minneapolis culture. A huge Viking fan, huge sports fan. Minneapolis and Minnesota is a huge culture. It is its own thing, and it's hard to explain to people, but I was all in. I still to this day love Minnesota, and moving was, and when I would move, I would drive down there. It's about a 900-mile drive, and I drove down there one time to meet with a manager, and I turned around and came back, and I did the whole thing in about 72 hours. And I would drive down there and come back, drive down there, come back. I was always coming back. And everybody's like, I thought you moved to Nashville. I did, but it took me a long time to just go, you got to let go of this. It was really hard on me to leave Minneapolis, but I knew I had to. And but it was like, I'll just stay here and just, we'll get another band and we'll get another record deal.
Right.
And then, but there was another connection that my dad had with a steel guitar player that told me Hank Williams III, who was Hank Williams Jr.'s son,
Mm-hmm.
who is the legendary Hank Williams grandson, was kind of taken off and he had his record deal, and he was going for it. And I was able to contact, and through some people, they put me in touch, and I was able to basically move to Nashville with the Hank III job, and that happened at the back end of 1995.
Wow.
And that was culture shock because he was as Southern as it gets. Rebel flags. They wanted me to put my amplifiers in Rebel flags, and I had to change the way I talked right away. I had to change the way I acted, and I had to almost change my persona to keep that job. And I wanted that job because I thought this kid is going to be the biggest thing in country music. I thought this kid is, because he could sing, he's got some charisma. He's Hank Williams Jr.'s son. He's Hank Williams, Hank Williams, the legendary Hank Williams grandson. And he looked exactly like Hank Williams Sr. And I thought, there's no way that this guy can't be the biggest guy in country music. And so I did everything I could to morph into what I thought he wanted me to be.
Was playing on his first album the first album you were ever on?
Well, I played on some of the Mullen, the Haymakers stuff.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it was my first Nashville.
Okay.
Well, I mean, and Jason Aldean had a band. I think it was called Young. There were so many things that you do in Nashville when you get to do studio work that you have no idea what you're doing.
Right.
In other words, I played on a session for this band called Young Guns, and then somebody told me later, yeah, Jason Aldean was the lead singer of that band. I don't even know to this day. So you do so many things. Sometimes, I mean, to a true session player, I never jumped fully into the session things, but I did a lot of session work, or I did my fair share, I should say. I don't want to say I did a ton, but sometimes you don't even know. You sometimes get called to do overdubs, and you don't even know what you're playing on. And sometimes you can find out you're going down the road and it's a #1 record or Grammy or something. It's like, hey man, you played on that. You're like, oh, that's cool. When did I do that? Oh, I did an overdub. And I've done a lot of stuff where I don't even know what it was, to be honest with you.
Right.
But Hank 3 playing on that first record, Rise and Outlaw, was my first big kind of record that I got to play on.
Right on. So kind of like football, in '99, you roll basically out into the industry as a free agent. You're kind of out there. You're up for grabs for people, and you're getting calls from some of the biggest names in country music. Talk about some of those opportunities.
Yeah. Well, what I had going for me was I was a pedal steel guitar player, which is a very unique instrument. You just don't pick up pedal steel guitar. It is a very, you've got, 20 strings. We've got 10 floor pedals, 70 levers. It literally takes anybody. If I was to teach the brightest young kid, you took a prodigy that could kind of do anything, and his love of steel guitar, you're going to spend a minimum 5 to 10 years learning how to do it. It's something that there's so much going on. There's nobody that's ever played that instrument in the history of the instrument that would ever tell you that they didn't get to a point where they would consider themselves proficient at the instrument till maybe year 10.
Wow.
So there's just not many of us. And to this day, they're not. They look at me right now when I get in the steel guitar world, or I get around anybody where steel guitar, I'm a young steel guitar player to this day. We look at each other and we go, man, we're getting kind of old, right? I mean,
hey, we look good
anymore.
And we look good too.
Well, exactly. But you know what I mean? It's like, we're not spring chickens, but in the steel guitar world, I'm still a spring chicken, because it takes so long for it for you to, it's almost like getting a med degree or something like that. How long before you become a doctor? It's kind of the similar kind of situation. So when I got to the point where I'd been playing professionally, and had some experience, and because I learned at 6, 7, and 8, and I kind of had a lot to draw from. When Kenny Chesney was when Kenny Chesney his career kind of took off, he wanted to put a young band together, and Brad Paisley was looking for a steel guitar player. The more country acts want that steel guitar, because steel guitar is kind of one of the singular, they say steel guitar or fiddle is the only thing. You can take a pop record and have Lady Gaga sing on it, and you can put a little steel guitar on it, and now it's country. So the instrument has the power to kind of express which genre it would go to. And so at one point, I literally had the Kenny Chesney, Brad Paisley, Lone Star, Andy Griggs. There was Dierks Bentley. There was 4 or 5 gigs that were in my lap. Of course, I'm not saying that I could have had all those gigs,
right?
But I probably could have. And the hot guy in that in '99 was Andy Griggs, and he was the one. There was a guy named Joe Galante who was the most powerful guy. Right now in Nashville, it's probably a guy named Scott Bruschetta who signed Taylor Swift. But back 15, 20 years ago, was a guy named Joe Galante, and he was telling people that Andy Griggs is going to be his next superstar. So I really went hard after that gig, and I had a really good time on the gig. He never could, sometimes it doesn't happen, right? We know they put a lot of money in a guy. They throw a lot. Sometimes it doesn't all. He had 4 or 5 #1 records. We toured with everybody. It was a great run, but he never quite jumped to that Tim McGraw level where he was kind of hyped to be. but that was the gig I chose.
But hey, you know what? All those opportunities and all those paths you choose lead to something different. And for
Right.
the last 13 years, if I have my math right, for the last 13 years, you've been playing solely with Gary Allan.
It's actually been longer than that, but
Okay.
yeah, I started with Gary in the end of 2005, 2006. So if you do that whole 2006 year up until right now, I think it's more like 15 or 16
Okay.
years. But yeah, no, I found a home with Gary Allan, and I met Gary Allan when I was on tour with Andy Griggs. There was a tour in Alaska, and they said, there's a tour we're going to go do in Alaska in December, and it's Andy Griggs and Gary Allan, and we're going to go together, and we're going to travel together. We're going to fly to different places together. And so here I was with Andy Griggs, and we were lumped with Gary Allan. So it's basically our two organizations, which is very rare to have two organizations like that kind of lumped together and travel together. It was just the way they bought the tour. And we spent about a week to 10 days. And I came home, and that was 98, 99. And I told my mom, we toured with this guy, Gary Allan, and he is cool, man. Like I told my mom at Christmas time, I said, this guy's cool. I mean, he was Captain Cool. And me and him were drawn to each other at that moment. And so that's when I first met him.
There's a picture of you playing with.
He's a special guy, man. I'll tell you what, I have nothing but admiration and love for that guy.
So look at that. You didn't. Andy Riggs didn't rise to that certain level, but later on you met Gary Allan through that experience.
Exactly.
So they all happened for a reason. And
it was. It did kind of. And I'll tell you, the funny thing is when the Gary Allan gig came to me, I had a couple people that were people always wonder, how do you get gigs in Nashville? Like, how does it happen? Like, let's say you're a 21. There's a kid up in Maple Grove right now that he sings, and he's got some bands. I don't want to. Jesse Becker's his name, and he played on the Osseo basketball team back maybe one of their championship teams. What that was, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. He's a talented singer. He's really good, and he's in Minneapolis, and I think he's probably going to settle into being in Minneapolis, and he's good with that, and that is okay. But let's just say, and I've encouraged him, man, if you come to Nashville and give it a swing for 5 to 10 years, you're good. The kid can sing. He's got the complete package. He just has it all. And if he was to come to Nashville, people always ask me, well, how does it work? What if you're a talented guitar player and your dream is to come to Nashville? How does it work? That's a natural question, right? Like, if you go to Nashville, do I just wait for the phone ring? And it's a networking thing. And it kind of starts around Lower Broadway, which is Nashville's little music hub, which is, when I say Lower Broadway, when you get to downtown Nashville where the Predators play hockey, that's right on the bottom corner, right across the street from where the Titans play football. That's Lower Broadway.
I know that street well.
Yeah, of course. A lot of people do now, because I have so many friends from Osseo. My brother Chris Nelson and Jason Eck and these guys, they've been some of them been down, and some of them are waiting to plan a trip. And I know a lot of them want to come down because it's kind of a party town. It's kind of the Southern Vegas now.
Right.
And so there's 100 bars in there where you can play from 8 in the morning to 2 o'clock in the morning that go pretty much nonstop, really. So you go get in that scene. You go and you go and they have open jams, and that's where you would start. You would just go there and you get into that scene, and through your social media, and you contact these people. Hey, I would like to come down there and play with you guys, or and that starts there. So that whole networking thing kind of happens, and you just kind of go from that whole standpoint. So I had this networking thing, and the steel guitar players, we know each other. They always say that guitar players can live across the street from each other and not know each other, and steel players can be across the world. We have our own forum. We know all each other.
Wow.
So I had a lot of people. Every time a gig would pop up, if something would happen, somebody would call me, or I would call somebody. We would network kind of through that scene. Here's what's open. So I always had that open dialogue. And so when the Gary Allan job came open at the end of 2005, 2006, I had to audition for that job. And even though I had hung out on that tour with Gary 5 or 6 years ago, I don't even know how much, I always kind of ask Gary how much he remembered of that. To me, I remembered every detail,
Mm-hmm.
right? I remembered when we were, I remember 100 different things from it. But to him, he probably didn't even know who I was, So I had to audition for the job. And then after I auditioned for the job and got the job, which the band chose, when we auditioned for a player, we choose, it's kind of a democratic vote.
Mm-hmm.
We'll choose who we want. And then if Gary shows up for the audition, then he'd get a vote. If he didn't show up, he wouldn't even get a vote. But of course, we choose somebody, and if we made the wrong decision, he's going to let us know right away.
Wow.
You guys screwed that up.
Right.
But so just because I won the audition doesn't mean I passed the test with him.
Right.
So it was like 2 auditions. It was like, okay, well, I beat all these other. I got the gig, but now I still have to make a connection with him and make sure that he wants to. So then after we kind of settled in, I was like, how much do you remember that Alaska trip? And starting to pick his brain, and I don't know how much he remembered. I remembered every detail.
Right. So playing with him as long as you have, what is one thing that Gary has taught you along the way that you've carried with you, that he's instilled in you?
Yeah, he's he's just really he's just one of the guys, and I think it's just being on the road and knowing just how to know that you're in a tour bus is 45 feet long, and you're in a tight space, and so I think it's just knowing to pick and choose your battles, be a good hang. Don't, he's all about a good vibe. If you're bringing a negative vibe, why are you bringing it? And I think he's instilled just the vibe, how to always stay positive and have a good vibe. And he also, he's done a few things like he wanted me, he said, what you need to do is you need to take that steel guitar and bring it out to the end of the stage and just play that thing. And I do a little trick with a Jack Daniels bottle. They have a thing when I first got on the job, they take a Jack Daniels bottle and put it on the end of the stage. I've never played with a band that has a bottle of alcohol on the stage. Usually we would have it in a little solo cup or something like that,
I saw that picture.
Set it down right there. But yeah, he has that bottle. And so one night I picked that bottle up, and you can kind of use it as a slide. And so I use it as a slide. And he goes, you need to take that steel guitar and put it on the end of the stage and play it. So I kind of, through him, I actually have a little wireless setup. I can take it, put it in wireless, and I can take that steel guitar and that Jack Daniels and take it everywhere. So I think it's more just like he was the first, to answer your question more specifically, he was the first guy I ever worked for that said, take that steel guitar and bring it to the people. You don't have to be 20 feet behind me. Just take that thing and do you. He's always been like that. Just you do you, and you'll be okay. So and that's unlike, usually artists wear black and stand 20 feet back and just look good.
Right. Good for him. Good for him for doing that.
Yeah, he's great.
You've, CJ, obviously throughout all your years, you've had the opportunity to grace many stages with many great artists that you've mentioned throughout this interview. Who to you has been the most influential artist that you've graced the stage with?
Very easy answer and a great question. Waylon Jennings. I was fortunate enough through Andy Griggs, when he was kind of up and coming, it was really kind of the hot thing. He was going to be the new Outlaw singer, which Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson they kind of basically invented the Outlaw, country music Outlaw. And now on XM Radio, you have the Outlaw channel, which was, we're doing it our own way. We're putting rock and roll drums behind it, and we're putting a little hard rock and roll. We'll put some pedal steel on it, but we're going to have an edge to it. And Waylon Jennings was kind of the creation of that. And I was a massive Waylon. I didn't know how big of a Waylon Jennings fan I was, but through Andy Griggs, I got to meet Waylon Jennings and then play with Waylon Jennings.
Wow.
And then because I knew all this history of where he'd come from through the Flame Camp, when I first met Waylon and we were sitting in a dressing room, there was a few people and then they kind of disband. Waylon asked me, where are you from, Hoss? And I said, Minneapolis. He said, you ever heard of the Flame Cafe? And there's that Flame Cafe. And boy, did I. And he said, what was that fiddle player's name? Now we're talking about a fiddle player that was the house band in 1955, 56, 57. And here I am at this point, a 28, 29-year-old kid. And I said, Leon Bollinger. He goes, that's right. And that, you know, that was like gold for me. That, at that point, he wanted me around. No, stay right here, kid. Because he knew at that point, I knew that history. I knew that history probably better because we were talking about Minneapolis. It was just in my wheelhouse. I probably knew that history better than anybody in his circle. In that, you know, not in Lubbock, Texas, not in the stuff that they had done, but the Flame Cafe, which was, 150 miles from the Clear Lake, Iowa, what am I trying to say there? There's a ballroom in Iowa, in Clear Lake, Iowa. Is it the Surf that Buddy Holly? Buddy Holly, the last thing. That's where there's a famous story of Buddy Holly was at his last gig was at the Surf in Clear Lake, Iowa, and Waylon Jennings was playing bass guitar for Buddy Holly, and the Big Bopper was sick. And Buddy Holly went to Waylon Jennings and said, hey, it was cold. It was like below zero in December. And Buddy Holly went to Waylon and said, hey, I just chartered a plane for us. We're going to fly up to Moorhead, Minnesota tomorrow, and we're going to get a hotel and get some sleep and all that. And then Waylon was like, great. And then the Big Bopper came up to him and said, Waylon, I'm sick as a dog. Can I have your spot on the plane? Wow. And Waylon was like, man. And then they joked about it, and there's a whole story about it. And Wayne said, well, I hope your plane crashes. And then Big Bopper said, well, I hope your bus freezes up. And then, of course, that little plane crashed not long after, and Waylon carried so much grief about that. But back to the story that I knew this history in Minneapolis and all that stuff that was probably the biggest tragedy that he went through that happened not far there. There was just a really cool connection that I had with him. And so to answer your question, Waylon Jennings, and I got to play steel guitar behind him, and he has some legendary steel guitar parts that were created by a guy named Rolf Mooney that was kind of Waylon's right-hand man that he had a rocky relationship with. And the fact that I knew Rolf Mooney's parts and I knew all the history, I really was able to bond with Waylon in the times I was around him. He was my number one hero. He was my Elvis.
Wow. Another great story.
Yeah, he's great.
So while you're immersed with playing music for all these other people, do you ever take the time to sit down at the steel guitar and make music for yourself?
I do. I write songs. I've got a bunch of songs I'm kind of sitting on. I do need, it's like something that's kind of been sitting in I've got some stuff that's just me and a guitar and lyrics and stuff that I feel good about, that I just need to kind of set that olive branch out. I've done some writing sessions, a handful with some other guys. It's just something that I haven't pursued heavily because I'm just kind of in that steel guitar world, and that's kind of where I put most of my focus. But I do some stuff. I've planned on trying to do, there was a point in my life where I was more involved with trying to do my own kind of steel guitar record and then go around and get singers that I played with to sing on it, because instrumental steel guitars, that's such a I don't want to say a compact kind of lane, but if for me, what I would be drawn to is me playing steel guitar and then having, I like vocals. You know, there's a time for instrumental stuff, and I do like that. But as far as having some of the guys that I've played with or girls that I've played music with, I'd like to kind of have them. That's something in the back of my mind right now. I'm still got this sports thing going on right now with my kids as they coming up and playing. So that jock thing's kind of driving me right now. And I feel like I'm maybe at the halftime of my musical career. So I'm kind of just taking a breath and waiting till this stuff kind of moves on. And then we jump back into playing. And maybe that's the second half of my career.
Absolutely.
And maybe,
Good for you.
Yeah, thanks, buddy.
You have some pretty cool endorsers in Mullen steel guitars and PV amplifiers. Talk about those relationships and what they've meant to you over the years.
Mullen steel guitars are made in Denver, Colorado. I always considered them the modern day Showbud, and that is they just have that sound, and they were kind of I don't want to say tailored after Showbud, but back in the day there were two kinds of steel guitars, and it's really cool. I talked about Buddy Emmons earlier, and so the two kinds of guitars were pedal steels were Showbuds or Emmons. So this guy Buddy Emmons has his names on both steel guitars that are competing against each other, and this guy has his names on both of them. That just shows you how cool he was. But the Mullen Guitars is basically the prodigy of a man who's probably in his mid to late 80s named Del Mullen, still alive. He built these guitars, and now his grandsons run this business, and I've been playing their guitars pretty much my entire career. I've been playing Mullen steel guitars. I have 2 beautiful guitars that they built me, and they've been great. And so they're from Denver. They're big Denver Bronco fans. I'll tell you this quick story, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the PV amp that I'm showing there. So they're big Denver Bronco fans. And in 2006, the band Rascal Flatts was super hot. They had so much stuff going. They had a song on the Disney Pixar Cars album. They had so many #1 records. They were the top selling country music act in 2006. And the Gary Allan Band was opening up. It was actually, at one point, it was Taylor Swift, Gary Allan, and Rascal Flatts. That was Taylor Swift's first time ever being on stage with a record deal, was that tour. So I got to meet Taylor Swift and became friends with her. She was wonderful. And so Taylor, Gary Allan, and Rascal Flatts, we're playing the Pepsi Center in Denver. And the Mullen guys, who I've had a relationship with since I was 19, they you know, I had steel guitars from them when I was back with Molly and the Haymakers. And they call, hey, we would like, this are the grandsons now are running this business. They said, we'd like to come to the show, Rascal Flatts. And I'm like, okay. So they come out to the show. John Elway is there. Jay Cutler and Tony Scheffler were this is 2006, were just drafted. Jay Cutler was the first round draft pick. Tony Scheffler was a tight end, was the second round draft pick. And John Elway was there. And so these Mullen guys, these kids get there, and man, they get bombed, right? These 2 Mullen grandkids, they're bombed. And they're just like, it's like, you know, we're backstage. I think, yeah, just after the show, you know, it's backstage. Everybody's together. And I've gotten to be pretty good friends with Jay Cutler now. And Jay gets to meet John Elway for the first time. And they shake hands. And now John Elway isn't running the Broncos. He's just, at this point, he's just kind of retired. And he's shaking his hands, and I'm right there for that first exchange, and just kind of like, and I'm gotten really close to Jay and Tony Scheffler is now one of my best friends. We talk regularly, and so that is going on, and these Mullen grandkids are bombed, and they're going up to Elway, and they're like poking him, man. They're like, you know, and so I've got Gary Allan's now comes up to me and goes, who are these clowns? Get them out of here. And I'm like, you know, they're going up to John Elway and go, hey, that throw you threw, I don't even know what you're talking about. That throw that you threw and that was garbage. What were you thinking about? So Gary's like, you got to get these guys out of here. So I'm sitting here going, man, these are my endorsements, man. What the heck am I going to do here, you know? And I love these guys, and if they see this, you know, I love you guys. So I'm not picking on you, but it was a great moment. And one other great moment I'll never forget that night is John Elway had a bottle of Jägermeister, and he had it going up like this, and he went up to Jay Cutler and he said, Jay, you're in the best situation you've ever been in your life. You're going to win 6 championships here. And Jay was, thank you. I really appreciate that. You know, he's just a rookie. He's a 22-year-old kid.
Right.
20 minutes later, we're together. I'm kind of running in the little Jay Cutler, Tony Scheffler circle. Elway comes back. Jay, you don't know how good of a situation you got here with Shanahan. You're going to win 3 championships here. Fast forward about another half hour later, Elway comes over. You're going to win 1 championship here. And then Cutler's like, we better get out of here before I don't win any championships. It went from 6 to 3 to 1. So that was a great moment. And I don't know how I got a little off track there with the Mullen folks. But that was one of I'll always remember that story. And then there I'm sitting on a PV amplifier, and Chris Kelly from PV Amplifier has been my artist relations. He's high up with PV, and they've always taken care of me, and I've got a good PV endorsement.
Right on. Is there any artists on the horizon that maybe you want to collaborate with or do anything with? If so, who are they?
Man, you're hitting all the boxes here. So last we were out in LA. I guess it's been a year, a little over a year, in December, and I was we were staying at the Sofitel, and I ended up at one of the bars over there, and I ended up hitting it off with Post Malone. And so I told Post Malone, of all things, right, hey, I'm a steel guitar player from Nashville. And about the time he says that to me, a security guard, like, he's got like 4 security guards, and they're about to come over and grab me. He's got his cell phone. He looks at me. As these security guards are about to grab me, Post Malone takes his cell phone and hands it to me and says, put your number in there. I've been looking for one of you. And so the security guards all, I mean, these are big boys. These guys all take a step back and just like, whatever. And so I put my phone in there, and then we started texting and contacting. And then Post Malone last March came to Nashville, and we texted there, and I was like, hey, man, whatever you have plans for you. And so right before quarantine hit, I think I was getting ready to go and play. I don't know where it was going, to be honest with you. But and now I haven't talked to him since quarantine. Nobody's really, how everything's kind of in a standstill. But there was something there at that moment I thought might happen, and we still were kind of corresponding through text messages and all that stuff. So I would like to. It'd be awesome to go and play on something. Go and have an opportunity to put some steel guitar on something that, because he has a big love for country music, and Hank Jr. and Hank Sr., and he did something you can find on YouTube or something online where he was singing "There's a Tear in My Beer" with all his boys, and I would love to. I think something could potentially happen there. I think it was on its way of happening before quarantine hit, but that would be my answer. I would love to see where that goes.
And don't hesitate if you ever have to drop, the MattyRocks interview, the MattyRocks Experience interview.
We'll do it.
You have my permission.
I will do it. Hey, man, it's like Paul McCartney told me once, don't be afraid to drop a name. We'll do it.
He's an interview I've wanted, and, hopefully an interview I'll get one day.
Exactly.
I think you might have already answered this question in the interview. Maybe not. But have you had that defining moment throughout this music career yet?
What's funny is one of my main bros back that I graduated ASIA with, Joey Zelenick.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember Joey.
I remember Joey.
So I'd been playing for, Nashville and doing what I thought was, a lot of Grand Ole Opry TV performances. We did a thing. We would play, the Grand Ole Opry happens at the Ryman in the fall, October, November, December, and January. So there's 2 Grand Ole Opry places. There's the Opryland facility, and then then the Ryman, which is down Lower Broadway, which they have the old original Grand Ole Opry. And so we did a Waylon tribute there, and one of my favorite moments was playing a Waylon tune at the Ryman on live TV. That was a big moment for me, and so I had some stuff that was really cool to me. But when I was playing with Gary in 2006, we played the CMA Festival, which was on ABC, and they fill up the Titan Stadium, so there's probably 50 or 60,000 people there, and then they put that on TV. And I got a call from Joey. Now, this was 2006. I had been in Nashville since, at least 11 or 12 years, and I had done things that I was, that I thought were really cool and all that. But Joey called and said, "Hey, man, Udee, I got to tell you, bro, you made it." And I thought, you never know what people's perception is of making it and all that stuff. So I've never, to be honest with you, it's never been about, I never, play on this record or be in the studio with this person. I've been fortunate enough to always play on a record of somebody that I was with. Gary Allan, he had a #1 record called Every Storm Runs Out of Rain in 2013. And I was fortunate enough to be on that. And so, technically there's not a lot of steel guitar on that song, but to be on a #1 record was cool. But to be honest with you, I've never had I've always, in that Waylon Jennings moment to me, because he was my #1 hero, to play behind him at that moment, everything from that moment, that was my moment for me. For somebody else, it might, hey, you're just playing behind an old country star, whatever. But for me, that was my moment. And if I get to do something, if the Post Malone thing comes to fruition, or Gary Allan, gets with Gary Allan, we've been on David Letterman multiple times, the Jay Leno show, Jimmy Fallon. I've had a couple personal great moments with David Letterman on the show, 2 different times where he's kind of singled me out and came over to me and gave me a big hug after our performance. And I've always had a great moments there. There's been great things that have happened, but at this point, it's just playing music, staying humble, and being thankful. And if there's moments that people can get enjoyment out of, every moment to me, it's that back to that. As cheesy it is, it's back living for that moment, even if it's playing with somebody that, there's a guy that named Blind Joe who's from Minnesota that was on The Voice. And he's down here. Of course, he can't see. And I love playing with him, and me and him got together. We played in my driveway. I had a blast. It was in my driveway. It was me and him. And it was wonderful. To me, it was as good as anything. And it's just, if somebody, sometimes it's just that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And for other people, they want to see big lights, big numbers. How many people have you played in front of? Those kind of things. When I was with Molly and the Haymakers, we did a show at KMPS in Seattle, Washington, and there was 165 people in the audience. It was a free show, and you could see people. We had the stage right here, and Reba McEntire was the main act, and we played right in front of her. And the people went back. 160,000 people were kind of in a narrow, kind of squeezed-in football field that went back as far as you could see, and the people were compressed all the way back, almost as far as you could see people. It's not like We Fest brings,
right,
what is that, 75, 80,000 people, but they're like this. They're kind of spread out. But at that particular show, when I was 19 years old, there was 160,000 people there to see basically Reba, but we were in front of her, so people were, I was 19 years old. How many people have you played in front of one time? Well, usually it's 8 or 9, but when I'm playing the clubs when I'm playing in Rockford, Minnesota, where I played a bunch of gigs, well, it's usually 75 to 100. But I was with Molly last week, and we were in Seattle, and it was 165,000 in one, on a Sunday afternoon. And but it didn't make a difference to me. It's almost like you get more connection playing in a bar with 80 people that you can go around and make a personal connection than you can just sitting there and dropping the brag that you played in front of 100 whatever thousand people.
Absolutely. What to you will be the one ingredient that keeps you playing this unique instrument for many more years to come?
The unique ingredient that
what will be that one key ingredient for you that will keep you playing this unique instrument for all these players for many more years to come, making this music?
I think it's just the love for the sound of the instrument. It's I always say that if my dad was a plumber, I'd be working on toilets. I think when I sit behind my steel guitar, I do feel like I'm making my dad proud. I do feel like I'm at home. And I think it's just, I'm this kind of stuff with you, I'm having a good time with, but generally I don't do a lot of this stuff because I don't like to sit around and talk about this kind of stuff. It's just, it doesn't do, it's if it inspires somebody, if there's, somebody that's up there in Minneapolis, whether it's Jesse Becker or somebody that says, hey man, maybe I should come to Nashville 5 years, and something good comes out of it, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But if you weren't from Osseo, and if you were just, hey, do you want to do this? I'd probably like, not really, because I'd rather be sitting down playing with my kids right now, but because of where we have this connection, and I'm really drawn to where I come from. If it wasn't for those kind of things, then, it's something that I generally kind of wouldn't do, but just the love for my instrument, and just to try to hopefully, continue to, have the passion for that.
Where can we send people to keep everyone informed on what's going on with you musically?
Well, I'm all about Gary Allan. I'm GaryAllan.com. I'm all about supporting him. He's the guy that I play, behind him and support his career. And I'm proud to bring. He loves steel guitar. His dad was very similar. When he met my dad, he goes, man, I met your dad. He reminds me of my dad. His dad is from North Dakota, and they played music up in North Dakota and had a country band, and then moved to Southern California to work at one of the Ford or GM plants back, long before, not long, but before Gary was born. So he's like this North Dakota country music kind of guy. And so they had a Fender steel guitar in their house growing up, and his dad wanted one of them to learn to play steel guitar. So he's drawn to the instrument, And so just me playing steel guitar for him. If this is I won't go and play with anybody else. If I go and am fortunate to do a side project or get to put the steel guitar out there for like a pop music or something where the steel guitar normally wouldn't be, that would be good for the instrument, I would love to do that, whether it's Post Malone or somebody else, or whether it's a side project. I will play with Gary Allan until he is, and that will be the end of my road. It's a family now. It is, we are brothers, and I'm playing for him from here on out as long as he wants to go. And when that road ends, then we'll shut down the road thing. And I have no desire to go work for anybody else. It's really it just wouldn't feel right. So it's to answer your question, it's all GaryAllan.com, and me being his steel guitar player and supporting him, and that's kind of the chapter, and probably will be my final chapter as far as touring goes.
All right. Well, CJ, I'm going to give you the last question. I'm going to give you the same opportunity that I give every artist that I have the opportunity to sit one-on-one with. And that is a message to MattyRocks listeners and viewers who are going to listen to this interview, hear this interview, watch this interview around the country and around the world. What would you like to say to them?
Well, I'm a big fan of yours. You asked every question that, I mean, you hit every box. I mean, it was almost like we got together and I said, here's what I would like to ask you, or have you ask me. And it was just, I was just really impressed how you've done your research, and it's really good, man. It's not just, you're not just doing this to do this. You really dug into there. You really dug into specifics, and it was just super impressive. And I would tell people to follow you, to watch this. I'm gonna continue now to follow what you're doing. I appreciate you having me with you, man. And I would just tell all the people that are out there and that can hear this to follow you, because, man, you really dug in there, and it was really impressive. And it wasn't just you doing it to doing it. You really are digging in there and asked really questions, and I feel like you brought something out of me.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Kind words, always. Thank you.
Absolutely.
CJ,
brother.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your night.
Hey, I want to show you. This is this is Colton Jennings. He's named after Waylon Jennings.
How you doing?
He's got the CJ moniker right here. He's 10 years old, and he's quite a ball player. And he loves his grandma and grandpa up, and they still live up in Maple Grove, Minnesota.
Right on.
He gets up there and gets to visit his grandma Suzanne and his grandpa Al Udeen. And this is Everly Udeen. She's named after the Everly brothers.
Hello.
And she's one of the fastest little girls you've ever seen in your life. She's got foot speed that'll blow your mind. She's a speedster and an athlete, and they love Minnesota. They love the Vikings, and they love all thing Minnesota, and they love to get up there, and they're big fans.
Right on. Nice to meet you too. Hey, so what's it going to take for our Vikings team? Come on, tell me something. What is it going to take, man?
I love it. This is where I don't ever talk anything politically. I don't ever talk anything controversial, but I talk crazy Viking stuff on Facebook. Anybody sees it, I saw you talking Vikings. I go wide open Viking stuff. I've been following them since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. The Vikings, the biggest problem to me with the Vikings, and it's a huge problem, is that the bar is set too low. We're just, that the bar is set too low. We're okay with just being good enough. We're okay with the quarterback. Quarterback's been playing for how many years? He's got a 500 record. People get on there and they throw some stat out there about some garbage stat or this or that. It's like the GM, Spillman's been there now. If you look for how many years he's been there running the show, if you look at the Vikings record from 2010 to 2020, you got the whole body of work. He's been running the show for most of the decade. It's 500 football.
Ouch.
It's just not good enough.
No.
It's not good enough. And it's time that the fans, they talk about don't go to Philly. The fans will really, they're passionate. I'm not endorsing that. It's time. I know we're nice. I love Minnesota nice. It is time we step up and say, you know what? It's not good enough. We're not happy. We write our letters. We scour the social media. We send all the stuff to the Will family. We just, hey, it's not good enough. There's too many. We've given we've thrown our money at the $1 billion stadium. We've got the best fan base in the country, because who could lose as much as we've lost and still go, right? Mm-hmm. They say the Green Bay Packers, that Brett Favre saved that organization, that it was about to go under, and that he saved the organization, and they've had a bunch of Hail Marys. we've never really had the Hail Marys. We've just kind of supported our team through a lot of disastrous situations. It's about time, and I think, you know what, this is an interesting fact. The Minnesota Vikings are the only NFL franchise that has never drafted a quarterback in the top 10 in their entire franchise. 60-plus years, we've never drafted a quarterback in the top 10. What does that mean? That means we've never gotten that rookie tier 1 quarterback. Now, do they all work out? You know, the argument is like you can throw 100 guys that win the top 10 that didn't work, but it's the best roll of the dice, right? You look at the Baker Mayfields, you look at Justin Herbert, you look at Patrick Mahomes, you look at all these quarterbacks that are kind of up and coming. They were drafted in the top 10. You got to kind of just throw some assets, throw some picks, throw a future one. You got to roll the dice on one of these kids. You got to do your research, and you got to build around that rookie quarterback. You get a rookie quarterback, you get a rookie contract, and now all of a sudden you can kind of throw some pieces. You can build that offensive line through free agency. I think you got to set the bar higher.
Oh, I tell you, I just hope something will happen here in the next couple of years. You know,
it's got to happen. You know, my dad, 91 years old, he introduced me to this stuff. I'm very close to Tommy Kramer. Tommy called my mom and wished her happy birthday last week. He's living in Blaine. I could tell you this whole story, how I ran into Tommy and met him in San Antonio, and how we've become very close friends. But it's part of my blood. It's part of my culture, and I'm just not good. 7-9 on the 10th, Rick Spielman's 10th year of his 5-year plan, not good enough.
Nope.
It's just not good enough. We got, I compare it to what the Twins did. Twins had Terry Ryan running the organization, and it just kind of was fizzling. And they brought this Derek Falvey in. He's done a pretty good job. You know, he knows what he's doing. We got to get a young guy in there who knows what he's doing, who's got a high football IQ, who's got a fresh mind, and he understands what he's doing. And I think it's a little tired right now with the kind of the good old boy system. Rick Spielman, Zimmer, Kubiak, now his son. It's just a little too good old boy. I think we got to go outside. We got to go find some winners, and we got to build this thing. And we've got to build it with the idea that there's no more Minnesota nice. Yeah. We're going to play with an edge now. You want to come in here, Green Bay Packer fans? You want to come in here? It's not going to be that. It's not going to be as nice as you want it to be anymore. We're done with Minnesota nice. It's time we start playing with an edge. And I tell that to my kids when they play sports, play with an edge. And I'll tell you what, when I play music, I play with an edge. I don't just play. I try to, good, bad, or ugly, I try to play with an edge. And I would like to see the Vikings run with an edge, and I would like to see the team play with an edge.
Absolutely. Let's hope that happens. CJ, thank you again for taking the time out of your busy night to sit with me. This was truly an honor, and I wish you nothing but continued success to everything you've got going on in your musical arena.
Man, you're good at what you do, buddy. I encourage you to branch out and think big. And nowadays the world is like what you've got in front of you. Maybe 25 years ago you couldn't do, because you'd have to go to a different market. You'd have to move to New York. You'd have to move to LA. Continue to do what you're really good at what you do.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
All right, man. You've heard it here. MattyRocks listeners, close it out with CJ Udeen and MattyRocks. Thanks again, brother.
Be cool, bro.
MattyRocks out.
Thank you.